Okay, so I might have just stepped into something, but I can tell you on this morning's message, I definitely stepped into something. Guys, remember what we're doing, what we're sharing on, where we're going right now? Did God really say? Did God really say? Why are we doing this? Can anybody remind me of that? Why this message? Why would we be sharing this and spending weeks, probably, truthfully, talking about asking or looking into things that we're wondering if God really said or not? Can anybody? Because it's so easy to become misled. Somebody else say something too? Correct. Bring out the truth in His Word and not just mantras. And a lot of them that actually can have truth to them, that are actually even good advice, that aren't necessarily bad things. But as we shared a few weeks ago, I personally believe the number one way that the enemy gets us is by basically presenting something that sounds extremely truthful and sounds really good and sounds like it makes a lot of sense so that we buy into it and then gets us just a little bit off course or sometimes way off course. But all he cares to do is to get us just a little bit off course because as we've shared, even if you took a flight from one coast to the other and you were 1 degree off when you started that flight, you're going to be way off when it's time to reach that destination. And this isn't about necessarily a destination, a heaven or hell type destination I'm talking about. I'm talking about the destination of being people who are actually pondering Jesus to determine if we are going to believe Him and actually be those who follow the way of Him and represent Him to the world around us. If we're going to be people who are salt and light of Him, if we're going to be people who are not just being with Jesus, but we're becoming like Jesus and doing what Jesus actually did like Him. Because in all the things that we like to talk about that this world needs, and I know it sounds so simple, but what they need is Jesus. And I don't mean just Him personally, like whatever, but I mean they need a dose of Him just like they did the days that He walked on this earth. That's why He came. The world, and that includes us, need Jesus. And He says, I'm going. I will not be here, but you are my hands and feet. But if we're quoting stuff and we're promoting stuff that isn't necessarily what He said, we're a little bit off, and it can really throw somebody else off. It can throw somebody into a place that they did not desire to be, and we hardly even know we're going there. So I do feel like it is important that we at times pull back and take time to stop and think about the things that we like to say, the quotes that we like to regurgitate, the cliches that we like to go to during difficult times, and consider whether it's really something that He said. And again, 2 weeks ago, I gave you 25 options. I've come up with more since that time and had you vote on the top 5 and the top 10, whatever, and we're going to go through starting there and then just see where we go from there. Those that you said, this is what I'd like for us to look at. But like I said, the one that we're going into today, the more I got into it, honestly, even as I stand in front of you right now, I can't say that I have this clear-cut way of crafting how I want to share this because it's just that kind of a topic. In fact, everything that I looked up to study and to prepare kind of started with the same thing. We're stepping into a big one here with what we're going to talk about today. It all started with that, and I think and I hope and I pray that when I'm done sharing, we'll understand why it's a difficult one. We're going to ask that question, did God really say that everything happens for a reason? Did God really say that everything happens for a reason? To get there, I want to start with just some scenarios that lead us to believe this. I don't know, have you ever heard about old Joey? A guy named Joey whose life was a roller coaster ride of highs and a roller coaster ride of lows. He had heartbreak, he had triumph, he had it all woven together into moments that either would become a disaster or part of what seemed like a great, grand plan. It all started in his life with family drama. Joey was the favorite son of his father, and he was such a favorite son that he was given special things that the rest of his brothers would not get. One of those included a coat that screamed, "Dad loves me the most." Dad cares about me the most. Naturally, as you would understand, this did not sit well with his older brothers. And then to make matters worse, Joey had these dreams, literal dreams that he would get that would suggest that one day he would be one that would rule over his family. Unfortunately, he decided to share these visions and these dreams with his brothers, and that didn't win him any popularity contest either. In fact, it got it to his place where his brothers were jealous, and they were frustrated, and they were irritated with him, and consumed by this jealousy, they devised a plan to get rid of him. They eventually stripped him of this favorite coat that his father gave him. They threw him in a pit. They originally were thinking of actually just killing him or letting him die, but they eventually ended up selling him into slavery to people that were passing by, these traders that were coming by. And eventually Joey ends up in a foreign country far from home as a servant in the house of a guy named Potiphar. I told you Joey's life was highs and lows, roller coaster ups and downs. And in this time that he was there, things actually looked like they were taking a turn for the better. Things were getting better because he earned actually Potiphar's trust, and he became the head of his household. And things were going good, and things looked good. But then all of a sudden, when things are looking up, something bad happens again because Potiphar's wife tried to hook up with him. And when he wouldn't let that happen, when he actually pushed back on that, when it looked like he did the right thing, responded the right way, he became accused and lied about. She went to her husband and said that he actually made the pass at her, that he was trying to get with her. And so that upset him and eventually got him landed into a prison, because that's what they did at that time. Just when it was looking like things were getting better. During this time, while he's in there, he still kind of hung to who he was. He still stayed with it. And eventually he got the attention of Pharaoh himself, because he was a guy that, would have these literal dreams. And while he's in here, he would still have them. He could also interpret dreams for people. And eventually his big break came when Pharaoh, the actual Pharaoh, was struggling because he had some dreams and he didn't know how to interpret them. And after years plus of waiting in this prison that he was in, he was remembered of this gift that he had, that he could go stand in front of Pharaoh and actually interpret a dream for him. So he got the break again. He's gone from high to low to high, and he got to be in front of him. And he did such a good job of interpreting this dream and sharing this dream with Pharaoh and sharing what was going to happen and impressing this Pharaoh so much, realizing there's something about this guy, that he eventually was even put in charge of Pharaoh, like second in charge. Like he's in this place where he's second in command over this country that's foreign to him. And he's got a lot of power. And he's got a lot of ability, and he's got a lot of say in what goes on. And while he's in this place, a famine, which happened to be what he interpreted in the dream, came about. But now he's gone from being the guy in prison to being the guy in charge of taking care of the people in this famine. And some of those people that were being struck by the famine were the very brothers that put him in that place in the first place. And eventually they had to make the trek to him to talk to him, to get the resources that he had available. And it took a while because he played with them a little bit. I don't know if it was a matter, because they didn't recognize who he was after all this time and all these years and all these days. Joey now found himself in a place where he's in front of these same brothers that he shared, that he had this vision that he'd be ruling over, and they were standing in front of him not even knowing who he was. He found himself in a place of a decision to make on how he should respond. Anger, unforgiveness, frustration, revenge, payback, or is there something else that he should do? And as the story goes of old Joey, he chose a path of forgiveness, a path of grace, a path of mercy. And the reason why he did this was, in his own words, because what you meant for evil, God meant for good, to accomplish what is now being done, which is the saving of many lives. I think you guys know who I'm talking about. Joey's full name is Joseph. But when's the last time you read his story and considered what just took place? Then you got a guy that you can read about in Scripture named Job. Job is one of, and right now with the men that we're meeting with, we're in Job, and it's created just some amazing, fun, good conversation. But in the words, I think, of one of them, man, Job literally got set up by God to face hell, literally face hell. Because while God's talking with his angels, who shows up but Satan, to the point that God even goes, "What are you doing here?" "I'm here to basically try and find somebody to take down." Well, have you thought about Job? Have you considered him? He's the man. He's the real deal. We got to relate. Things are good here. Well, yeah, that's because you've blessed him with everything. You've given him everything. Life is great for him. Why wouldn't he be happy? Why wouldn't he be following you? Okay, you can take everything he has, but just don't touch him. And again, this is where sometimes we lose the humanity in the Bible story. In one day, Job loses his cattle, his crops are stolen. He loses his house. He loses his children while they're partying and stuff falls in. Like, he loses everything except for his wife in one day. And if that's not enough, this whole scene takes place again as Satan shows up and talks to him, and he says, "Okay, you can touch him, but you can't touch his life. Or you can't take his life." And now he's stuck with boils and bad health and everything. This guy that does nothing wrong gets in there. And when you follow the story of Job, you just see him sitting there really thinking, what in the world just happened? With some amazing friends to show up and give him all the advice on what took place and what he must have done wrong in order to bring this on him. And you get days, if you're reading it chronologically, to weeks of depression and despair and confusion and whatever until, sorry guys, but spoiler alert, to the end, redemption. Why? Because everything's done for a reason, right? We read these stories and they tend to show that, yes, God did say that everything happens for a reason. But then we hear things like one that I'll never forget of a youth pastor, one quite call him friend, but colleague, someone I knew quite well out on the West Coast, who for years was looking forward to marrying a woman, finding a woman, marrying a woman, being a married man is what I'm trying to say. He was looking forward to that day and found a great young woman that he had the privilege of marrying. And not long into their marriage relationship, not long into that, found themselves, I think, on a trip. I don't know all the details at all, and seems like it was back in this area. I even want to say Denver, but I don't know for sure if that's where it was, on a trip. Driving along on the bottom pass of some highway, interstate, underpass, overpass. You know what I'm trying to talk about. One's going under, one's going over. Driving along, just taking the drive, taking the trip, and the next moment having the pipe that had come off of a truck from the upper half come through the window and take her head off right in front of him. That's all I know of that story. There's no redemptive thing to it. And then you go, everything happens for a reason. Huh? This is why I said I stepped into it today. This phrase, everything happens for a reason, is a really hard one to try and define and figure out and understand. Because here's the deal, God never did say that everything happens for a reason. If someone were to ask me, did God ever say that everything happens for a reason? My answer is no. He does not. But if someone goes, well, even if he didn't say it, if he didn't actually say it, if he didn't actually put the words out there, is it still implied from Scripture? Like, does it still show through it? Like, I mean, what about Joseph? Like, what about Job? What about these here? Does it still, like, that's in there, like, it's got to be that everything, I mean, I understand what happened here and so many other tragic moments that we cannot even explain. I get all that, but doesn't God still show this in here? Like, doesn't things still happen for a reason? Like, we see stories like what I just shared, and as I've spent the week looking into this more, trying to come to a conclusion, God, did you say or did you imply at least that everything happens for a reason? Here's what I've come up with when somebody asks me for my answer. The answer is yes, no, maybe, maybe not. I don't know. I still don't know. The conclusion I have come to is that everything does happen for a reason. It just maybe not the reason that we're thinking of when we say that. I have come to the conclusion that everything that does take place in life happens for a reason, just maybe not in the way we mean it when we say that. When you know when that is, when something tragic has happened, when something tragic is taking place and we're looking for answers or we're looking for a way to bring solace to the situation and solace to the person or the people that are involved, this phrase, everything happens for a reason, is the cliche that a lot of people of faith fall back onto when they're trying to make sense out of the moment, when they're trying to make sense out of the suffering, when they're trying to make sense out of the hurt, whether that be a particular situation or we fall to it when something big, national has taken place. We like to say, well, you know, everything happens for a reason. When we say it in that way, I don't know that God has ever said that or necessarily even implied that. Which ironically, by the way, the other thing that struck me as I was thinking through this week, we never say anything that something happens for a reason when it's good. It's only when it's bad. Like I've never heard somebody in a good situation go, well, everything happens for a reason, probably partly because we're like, oh crud, what do I got to do with this good thing that I got? But it's only when it's bad and we're looking for something to do that. It's in these moments when we don't really know what's going on that we jump to that tagline response, well, it's going to be okay. You know why? Because everything happens for a reason. I can't stand up here in front of you. I can stand up here in front of you and say, God never said that. In fact, I forgot to put it on a PowerPoint, but I actually found this week a nice little thing that I could have put up there as a picture that says everything happens for a reason. And you know what it had under it as the founder, the author, whatever you want to call it, the source of that saying? American proverb. Not God, Jesus, or Scripture. So I can tell you that he never actually said that. He never said those words himself. The author of truth never actually said these words himself, nor did anybody that ever said they were representatives of him. But there are enough things in there that make you think, man, it could be that it just leaves you confused. And so I stand up here this morning coming to this place after considering it, after just honestly meditating on it and researching it. I think that, yeah, kind of everything does happen for a reason. It's just, again, not the one we think of. There is an element, and we get this again also from the reason that we like to hang on to it is because it helps fulfill the definition of our doctrine and our theologies of God's providence and God's sovereignty. That's where we go to and where we pull this from. The providence of God, his ability to provide anything we need, anything that needs to happen. Like we believe that God can do anything and that he's sovereign enough, he's there enough, he's available enough, he's aware enough to do that. And so it's out of these two doctrines that this phrase actually comes from, this idea actually comes from, that God unceasingly cares for the world and can provide for the world and is involved with the world. Where it starts to get tricky and you see denominations split from this and you see ideas split from this is how we look at how far we go with that. Because there's two different ways that people actually talk about God's providence and God's sovereignty. One of them is with the landlord method, or as someone said, the computer programmer method, where he comes in and he sets everything up and he gets everything into place, and then he leaves and he says, now you take care of this and call on me when you have a problem. Call on me when you need something fixed. Call on me when I need to send you Clayton to take care of it. With that. Or the computer programmer, he sets the whole thing in place, thinking there's no way it can get hacked really, and so just follow the computer programming. And some people think that's how God's providence and God's sovereignty works. The others are with the more micromanager part of it, the scripted part of it, what we call the predestined part of it, where we think it really doesn't matter what we do, the script has been written. We look at it that way, so we think everything happens for a reason because God is just involved with everything that goes on, and the script has already been written. It really sounds a whole like a lot of just news I've heard the last week about a certain league and a certain team. If you know what I'm talking about. Doesn't matter. There's a lot of people that think today the game doesn't matter. It's already been scripted. It's been written. And we treat God the same way. As though, and we call that predestination. And in those two ways, in the providence and the sovereignty aspect of it, that's where this idea has come from. But the problem with the landlord method and the computer programmer method, that idea, that theology, that doctrine is, you start throwing holes in it because then you go, then how come you would have scripture like this? It says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he'll make your paths straight. If he's just going to be someone who just puts it in place and goes absent, why would we even do this? He's not around to help guide us and lead us through it. And for those that fall into the line of going, well, it's predestined, it's already put in place, it's already been scripted, it's already going to happen, it doesn't matter what I do, then what do we do with Paul's words that say each of us are going to give an account of ourselves to God at some point? Because it takes away any responsibility on our part. Oh, I slipped up, I said that, I did that, I shouldn't have done that. Well, it don't matter, it's all scripted, it's all put into place, everything happens for a reason, so I said that because that's going to happen, so whatever. Then why would he say that what am I giving an account of someday? So when we start jumping in, see, you're probably just as confused as I am right here, right? Okay? When I'm sharing all this and I'm putting all this is the thing with this saying, and this is why I've come to the conclusion that everything happens for a reason, just maybe not the way we think it does. Maybe it's more because of reasons we can understand and actually be involved with. See, I'm going to give you 4 just quick reasons why I think everything happens for a reason. Starting with the most basic one. And that's because humans have the freedom and free will to make choices, including stupid ones. Sometimes when things are going that way, sometimes the answer is just somebody made a dumb choice. In fact, do you remember this one? When the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and she ate it, and she gave it to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. And what came of that? Yeah. Well, crud. Listen, if God has everything scripted and everything just happens for a reason, then we were set up from the very beginning, right here. Or, if we have the freedom to choose, we have freedom to make choices, including stupid ones, that do lead to other things that happen, the other reasons why that happens. This would make more sense. And all through Scripture, he's showing this. He's coming back to this, including even setting up his people. When he's talking with Moses, he gives them this challenge. He says, "This day I call the heavens and the earth as witnesses against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now what? Choose what? Life." How do we get to life? By choose. If it was just predestined, what are we choosing? If everything's just going to happen for the reason anyway, the way that we like to say it, like that just happened because there's a reason for it. I mean, outside of, it's because somebody made a choice through the freedom that they have to do whatever they're going to end up doing. Tomorrow morning, I'm heading to Southwest Kansas for a couple days with this deal with the state to meet with pastors in the Church of God in Ulysses and in Dodge City. I have a quarter of a tank of gas in my pickup right now. If I decide to leave tomorrow without filling up the rest of that tank, and before I get to Ransom, because that's where my pickup will be, I run out of gas, was that just for a reason? Well, it just happened for a reason. Or was it because you should have put some gas in the tank? You knew what was coming. Was it my stupidity and my laziness that led to that? If it was on the verge of a major breakdown with my pickup and I took it to my dad and he says, I wouldn't take this thing, it's not in good shape, I would get something else, and the part wasn't in yet to be able to do it, but I decided to go anyway and it broke down, is that because everything happens for a reason? Or because I have the freedom to choose what to do? And what happened, the reason that it was, is because I made a choice that wasn't smart. And it can go on the good as well. These are just low-key examples. I can give you, or I can think of many more extreme and tragic moments that come from people utilizing their freedom of choice. But one of the reasons why everything happens for a reason is because of our ability to choose. The freedom we have to make choices. And a lot of the reasons that we experience are from a choice that somebody made. And a lot of times they lead to those difficult, hard ones because those choices they made were made. And the second reason why this happens is because they're made on a planet where sin is a powerful force. And it leaves a lot of trouble and destruction in its wake. We want to attribute things that happen, tragic things that happen, to God, when the reality is it's people that have the freedom to choose living in a sin-broken world, making sin-broken type choices that have left a wake of destruction and hurt. It's the reason why Jesus made the promise we don't like to hang on to. In this world, you will have trouble. Can I tell you this? It was not God's design and plan and purpose when he put everything together that we're going to live in a world of trouble. That wasn't what he had in mind. But the reason it exists is because sin is a powerful force on this planet. In fact, Paul describes the wages of sin and what it can do is death. That's how powerful this force of sin is. So when people who get the freedom to choose in a sin-broken world make those choices, the reason for the happening takes place. Because eventually, the third one, the reason that this all happens is because the law of sowing and the reaping is a real thing. And when sin broken in a sin powerful world, people with the freedom to choose make choices that are not good, the reaping of that sowing comes about. And the reason that everything happened is presented. Not because God said, you know what? I want this terrible thing to happen. But a person with the freedom to choose in a sin-powerful world made a choice to sow, and the reaping happened. When you hear tragic stories, saw one that was an anniversary not long ago of one of our own young people in this town whose dad was killed by a drunk driver. If anybody were to go say, everything happens for a reason, the reason was because a guy went out and drank too much and got behind the wheel of a car when he shouldn't have. And the result was tragic. Someone finds out that they're pregnant and they didn't want to be before they wanted to be. Well, what happened? We went out, maybe had a party, maybe didn't, got caught up in the moment. Did the one thing that can happen to get there? It wasn't because God went for this reason, because that's not his plan. A relationship got broken because someone talked behind the other person's back and gossiped and did some other stuff and said some things about him that shouldn't have been said. It wasn't because God goes, you know what, it's more part of my plan that you two don't care about each other and like each other. I just want to break up. But someone is reaping the sowing of gossip and slander in that relationship. The someone who, again, has the freedom to choose with the powerful force of sin involved in their life, and they sowed something that they're now reaping. Everything happened for that reason. These are the everything happens for a reason that we most often experience when something comes about, when we're trying to figure out what took place, that's it. But then, I will say this, and this is where it just throws everything into confusion, and then I'm going to tie it into what the question I think we need to ask. There is still one other reason why things do happen for a reason, and that is because God sees a bigger picture than we do, and He does allow or even cause or invite, in the name of Job, some things to take place that we just never will understand. There are elements where God does allow something, where He doesn't step in and intervene. Or again, this just totally just messes with my mind, even to this day, that He said, have you thought about Job? Like, it's so black and white in Scripture, I can't even argue it. To be like, God wouldn't do that. He just did twice. But it was because God saw a bigger picture than Job could ever see. He saw the end of the story. He knew where things were going. And I know that there's a ton of questions that are not good for a platform moment, which is a plug to remind you there are great opportunities on Wednesday night to talk about this and have conversation with the questions that keep coming up. But there are moments still, as we see in the life of Joseph, as we see in Job, and we see in many other moments where God sees a bigger picture and allows or even encourages something to take place that we'll never see. And the reason why is because He's God and we're not. And here's the deal. Well, that's the reaping and sowing one. We see only reflection as in a mirror. Eventually, we're going to see more. Now we see in part. And there's going to be a day when we'll see more fully, be known more fully, understand more fully. Some of the things that do happen for a reason are only God knows reasons. I don't know. And I can tell you one of my number one things that I come to in my own life through my own experiences at times, but also in tragic moments, is I don't know the answer to that. I don't know the reason why. Sometimes it's pretty easy. I can look back on my own life. And really, when you just have those moments when you stop, there are moments where you just go, how did that happen? How did that take place? How did that get there? And there's many times where I can realize because of my decision. Even starting with where I went to college to start out was because I decided to take a scholarship to play ball. That's really didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I guess that's part of it. But I decided to take a scholarship to play basketball to keep that going for a little bit. But I'll tell you, that 2 years was crappy. I often say the worst 2 years of my life. And so I can look back on it and go, why did that happen? Because of my decision to go do that. In the process, the decision in between then to go to a different school in Oregon where things went great became, and yes, I believe God is a part of all this. This isn't just a message of this is just me, this is just us, we're on our own. He helps guide it, but eventually had to make a decision to say, I'm going to go here, which led to a different path. And what was the reason? From a decision, from His guidance. I think the whole time He knows what's going on. And then the really weird one, I think back many times, and I've shared, I think, with you before, I was not supposed to marry Leanne. I think you guys know that I like her, and I'm glad that I did. That wasn't the plan at one time. I don't think it was her plan to marry me. She had another guy in her life as well. And that became a moment where I went, how did this happen? Because that wasn't my decision. I am not the one that broke up. Where I feel God might have helped encourage something to reunite in a time and place where I just thought there's no way. And then to get to a place where all of a sudden we have a kid way before the planned time was supposed to come. That was a mix of decisions and God, I'm sure, in that one there, right? To change what was in mine, and even just getting myself back to here after trying to be like, there's, I know I'm sorry, it's just vague to you all right now, and I can talk to you more about it in detail, but I stop and I go, everything happens for a reason. And when I pull back and think and go, that's reason because I did that. That reason, I don't know. And I had no idea in the moment. God, that was you. Now I can see it. That reason's because that happened. That, I still don't know. And a lot of times when we get to these tragic moments in our lives, that's where I find myself more often not going, I don't know. I really don't know the reason. But here's where I've come to even more as we get ready to close up. I'm done asking the question because I don't think God ever told us to ask the question. I don't think He ever encouraged the question. He never actually put the idea out there and said it Himself. At times in Scripture you can read it and see things play out, yes, but I don't think the question that He's really wanting us to look for is there a reason why this happened? Does everything happen for a reason? Is whatever? I think the question He's wanting us to understand that we're not going to come up with an answer to this. But the question He wants us to actually answer and look at and consider is, what can He do now? Like, whatever the reason may be is the reason. Whatever reason was put in place at the time, whatever reason brought to that, instead of asking God to help make it make sense, I think what He wants us to do is just come to Him now and say, help take me to the next step. If it's a place of ashes, please help make beauty out of these ashes. And honestly, I would turn around and say, if it's a place of blessing and beauty, please help keep me from making ashes out of this. In my ability to choose in this sin-strong world where my sowing can cause a reaping, I think what He would really rather we do, instead of just going, what's the reason for this? What's the reason for that? Which you see that, again, all through Job. They're just trying to figure this out. What'd you do? What'd you do? What'd you do? How about we just go, God, I still trust You. I mean, you've never failed. You are sovereign. You are provident. You are in control. Help make the beauty out of these ashes that You promise. And keep me from making ashes out of this beauty that You've given me. Because I'm never going to be able to answer this question fully. Is there a reason for this? Is there a reason this happened? And I think that's where He would rather take us. Because the other thing that does is keeps us from trying to figure out what happened and take us forward in the future of what's next. Last week, I read to you that scripture. We looked at that scripture where Jesus shared His mission, His purpose for coming, for the poor, the oppressed, the widow, all of them. That wasn't just something He did in that moment at that time. That came from a passage of Scripture in Isaiah. And He didn't read the whole section that was in Isaiah. And sometimes I wonder why, but I guess that was just what it was supposed to be for that moment. But today, I think it gives us the heart of Him even amongst this question. See, what Isaiah actually wrote was, the Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me, because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. And this, again, is who Jesus says He was. This is the passage he read. He says, the Spirit has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives, to release from darkness for the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor, and on the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn. Jesus didn't read that part. He sent me to do all this, but then He's also sent me to comfort all who mourn, to provide for those who grieve in Zion, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. To the place where eventually they will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendor. The question he wants us to ask when something happens and we're going, why is this happening? Did this happen for a reason? It's more, God, help me, just help make beauty from these ashes. Whatever, I don't know the reason. Maybe sometime he'll give us the gift of an answer and he'll help us see. Maybe we'll live long enough that we'll be able to look back and go, man, that's where that led to. Now I get it. But maybe we'll be a youth pastor who's with his young wife and, to my knowledge, never have an answer. At that moment, all we can do is say, God, bring beauty from these ashes. Bring beauty from these ashes. Bring me back. Keep me close to you. Help me get above the waves in this ocean of grief that I'm in. Help me to continue to just trust in you. That's where I'm at today, because I can't tell you. Does everything happen for a reason? Yes. No. Maybe. Possibly. I don't know. But what I do know is whatever the case, whether it's my own choosing from sin and reaping what I've sown, or it's because it was something that God sees that I'll never see, he's going to make something great out of anything. And he'll help walk with us so we don't make ashes out of the beauty we've received. Let's stand and let's worship him one more time as we close today.